welcome to the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for another episode of the MessianTics podcast. We are today continuing a string of viewer or listener, I guess listener is more accurate, listener submitted questions that we're responding to. And so we're going to jump into this one. This question is coming from Joe, and it says, what does Gentile participation look like in Jewish lifecycle events? Are Gentile kids allowed to have bar and bat mitzvahs, brit milah, etc. in your communities? If so, what's the rationale? If not, what's an alternative? And how do you convey to families about Messianic Jewish and Gentile identity as one in Messiah? Now, this is a topic that we've addressed a few times in different ways over the two seasons that we've been running this podcast, but this is a very direct question, and so we wanted to interact with this question for a little while today. And in essence, for those that maybe aren't quite so familiar, in essence, the question really has to do with what is the inclusion of Gentiles in Messianic Jewish life, culture, practice within the congregation, because there is a bit of a division in the Messianic Jewish movement over whether or not Gentiles should be able to participate in traditionally Jewish life cycle events like brit milah or the circumcision ceremony, like a bar bat mitzvah, participating, carrying the Torah scroll, reading from the Torah scroll, wearing talitot, and so on and so forth. And there are Messianic Jewish congregations who, rather than allowing Gentile kids in their congregations to have things like a bar bat mitzvah, that have developed either similar but separate programs or ceremonies that they call a B'nai Avraham, or there are some that have adopted the confirmation concept into their service or their life cycle for their congregation for Gentiles, rather than having them participate in a bar bat mitzvah, with the perception that a bar bat mitzvah is specifically for Jewish kids, and that in order for Messianic Jewish people to maintain their Jewish identity, there's a perceived obligation that Gentiles in the Messianic Jewish movement cannot participate in these things, or it will water down the Jewish identity. Now, I think it's fair that I could speak for all four of us and say we do not particularly agree with that. And so in our congregations, we do allow for bar bat mitzvahs for non-Jewish kids along with Jewish kids. We don't have a different ceremony for them, and so on. We do allow brit milah for non-Jewish kids, and such as that. We do allow for non-Jews to participate in the Torah service, to wear talitot, and so on and so forth within our congregation. And the rationale, at least for me, and we'll open up in a second for everybody to jump in, the rationale, at least for me, is that we are one new man, right? The scripture makes it clear, starting with Moses, by the way, not with Paul, that and not with Yeshua, but starting with Moses in Deuteronomy, that it's the circumcision of the heart that matters most. The circumcision of the flesh is a outward sign of something that should already be existent on the inside. And so for me, at least within a Messianic Jewish context, when there are non-Jews who have wholly dedicated themselves to Messianic Judaism, to Messianic Jewish life, I think it is personally, and I'm going to use very strong words here, I personally think it is atrocious to put up fences that do not allow them to fully participate in the life and calling that they feel God has brought them to. Now, within Messianic Judaism, it is a very common thing that you will see people come in that are not Jewish, that are from the church, that will come into a Messianic synagogue. They jump on the fad for a little while, and then 3 months, 6 months, a year later, they vanish. They're gone, right? And that is what it is. But we have people in our congregation, one specific family, that are not Jewish, that have been a part of our congregation for 12 years. So we started, for reference, our congregation is 13 years old. They've been a part of our congregation for 12 years. When they started coming, the daughter was 18 months old. Her and my son are pretty much the same age. I think there's like a month or two difference between them. They've literally grown up together. The only thing she has ever known is Messianic Judaism. Now, she doesn't have any misnomer that she suddenly is Jewish because she goes to a Messianic Jewish synagogue. And the reason for that is because we do teach Messianic Jewish and Gentile identity within the concept of Messianic Judaism, and that just because one is Jewish and believes in Messiah doesn't make them not Jewish anymore, which is what often the church teaches. And likewise, because somebody is not Jewish and believes in the Jewish Messiah and comes to an understanding of the Messianic Jewish faith, that doesn't suddenly make them Jewish. But that also doesn't negate the fact that we are to be one new man, that God has made one from the two one, and that we are to live and act and worship together. So with that said, I'm going to throw it out there, and this conversation will develop as we progress.
Yeah, I want to clarify, or at least make it stated, that this conversation we're having today deals specifically and only within the folds of the Messianic Jewish community. So those that aren't part of Messianic congregations, we're not speaking and saying that every Baptist or every Presbyterian or every Assembly of God needs to abide by these things. Neither are we saying that they shouldn't want to or desire to if the moving of God's Ruach leads them in that direction. But we're specifically talking about within the folds of our unique synagogues.
And to that effect, we're not speaking for all of Messianic Judaism either. We are speaking to the question from our perspectives and our congregations.
Exactly. So the second part of that is that I think it's, and this is my opinion, I think it's somewhat ridiculous for us to say that if a non-Jewish person has a bar mitzvah, that's going to cause confusion for them or other people that now they're somehow Jewish. Because Judaism is a faith, Jewishness is a ethnicity. And so you don't become Jewish by doing Jewish things in that way, or Judaic things. For instance, nobody who eats chicken soup, matzo ball soup, like if Toby eats matzo ball soup with me, it doesn't make him Jewish. If he eats brisket with me, that doesn't make him Jewish. If he eats a bagel with lox with me, it doesn't make him Jewish. Doing Jewish stuff or Judaic stuff doesn't change genealogy or genetics. It just incorporates a lifestyle into that person or with that person. They're doing stuff that would appear to be Judaic, which honestly appears to be biblical, because Judaic stuff comes from the Bible. So in our congregation, we don't have a problem. In the same way the Bible says there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither male nor female, neither free nor bond. When we sing liturgy together in Hebrew, nobody looks at the women and suddenly goes, I can't tell they're a woman anymore. Or it's not a matter of doing something Jewish makes it so you can't tell the gender of somebody. Neither would doing something Jewish change the genetics of that person. And so we need to stop acting out of fear that somebody doing something biblical is going to confuse them or someone watching them. Rather, we need to teach healthy, biblical differences and roles and responsibilities. The Gentiles or non-Jews within our congregation should not be confused, nor should they desire. I coined a term years ago, which I call it transgentile, and that's Gentiles who think they were born in the wrong genealogy. And that's a problem. But that problem is fed by not Gentiles wanting to be Jewish, but by Gentiles wanting to be biblical and being told by Messianic Jewish leaders that they can't participate fully because they're not Jewish. And therefore, there's a desire in their heart to do something biblical that they're being robbed of because of their genealogy, which causes them to have an unhealthy desire to be Jewish rather than to be biblical.
I've seen over the years, and I'm not Jewish, and I live a Jewish lifestyle, and that doesn't make me Jewish, and I understand that. But over the years, you hear more and more, you learn more. And I see two schools of thought with it when it comes to Gentile participation. One is really what we just kind of laid out which is if Gentiles want to feel called to not just serve God, not just support Israel, but to serve God and live a lifestyle among Israel, not becoming Israel, but living, worshiping among Israel, like at a Messianic Jewish synagogue. What we presented is they should not be hindered, and they should not be obstacled, and they should not be treated differently. That the things that are available to Jewish kids, which I'm David's assistant rabbi, so CMC is my congregation as well, and we do, not to repeat what David said, but we allow our Jewish and non-Jewish kids both go through a B'nai Mitzvah program. It doesn't have a different name for non-Jewish kids, and yes, Torah service participation is open to Jews and non-Jews, and there's two schools of thought on that. And just to get back to what I was saying, one is the one that we've just laid out. And the other one that I've heard in the past few years, not that it's a new thing, but just the more I've been exposed to Messianic Judaism beyond my congregation, or the more research I've done, the other view is from the, I don't want to say faction, but from the other school of thought from Messianic Jews, is that if you allow Gentiles, and Rabbi Eric touched on this a little bit, but if you allow Gentiles to bar mitzvah, if you allow them to wear talits, if you allow them to participate in the Torah service, what you will do is you will create confusion. You will, I've heard some people say, quote, change the color of the movement. It's a great choice of words. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, you will change the color of the movement. And to me, that just smacks more of fear than faith. Because my belief is Gentiles having a genuine, theologically sound calling into Messianic Judaism and participating as equals, according to what Paul says in Ephesians 2 with the one new man, does not change the color of Messianic Judaism. It does not create confusion. I think it has the opposite effect. I think it enhances Israel's call. I think it increases Israel's glory, because I said to David the other day when we were in the office, I said, these guys that hold to this, these people, my brothers and sisters in Messiah, who hold to that view that Gentiles should be kept at arm's length, or should only be able to allow to do certain things, to do that. People that feel that way, they're missing so much of what the prophets say about the nations coming to Israel. And I said, whether they like it or not, the nations are coming, right, and they will continue to be coming, and they will continue.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get, as Scripture says, if you read Isaiah, it is only going to increase the amount of people from the nations that are coming to Israel. And for me, in my own personal testimony, when my son was born, I had a very strong conviction from the Lord to circumcise him on the 8th day. Now, a Messianic Jewish brother or sister might tell me, well, you didn't have to do that. No, I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to do that. But are you going to tell me that I wasn't hearing from the Lord when I felt a strong conviction to circumcise him?
Right.
I wasn't making him Jewish. It's interesting because both in the Tanakh and in the Brit Chadashah, there are very few prohibitions. For instance, Numbers 15, when God tells Israel to wear tzitzit, he does not make a distinction to say outsiders don't do this. He doesn't tell outsiders not to do it. He just says tell Israel, which Israel at the time was made up of
right,
Jews and non-Jews, right? When we go, and that's just one example. We don't, for lack of time, but let's go to the New Testament. Yeshua does not give any prohibitions to non-Jews. Most of his interactions were with Jews. And he gives reasons for that, the Messiah, of course, would be sent first to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But Yeshua makes plenty of allusions that he says, there are sheep in another flock I'm going to bring in. He tells the disciples to make other disciples of all the nations when he leaves. But what I'm saying is, Yeshua never makes prohibitions. He doesn't tell his disciples, this is what you do when Gentiles start coming in. Which is why and why he didn't do that, I don't know. That's, the Lord knows best. But, and then when we get into Paul, Paul makes a lot of statements about, he makes a lot of statements. But again, Paul is dealing with so many problems, not just the nations coming in, but also some factions of Jewish believers saying that you have to be circumcised. And Paul's saying, no. So Paul's main mission was the gospel. And again, you have to understand when you're reading Paul's letters, you're only reading one half of the conversation, so you don't know exactly what these churches are telling him and what they're reporting to him. And I think that we're always going to have some of this disagreement, probably until Yeshua returns. I just know that for me, if the Bible says that the nations are going to come to Israel, and the Bible is very, very, the prophets are very explicit in Isaiah 56 that God says that the temple will be a house of prayer for all nations. In Ezekiel 47, God even says that there will be non-Jews assigned to tribes. And I don't understand how you can read that and then not understand that not only are nations going to come and bless Israel, but they will be incorporated into.
I want to add to that. Not only will they be assigned a tribe, but they will gain inheritance in the promised land with the tribe among whom they live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so again, to get back to what I said without, I don't want to, make it too, I don't want to water down the point I'm trying to make by talking too much. I'm saying this comes down to two schools of thought. One school of thought of Messianic Jewish believers believe that if the nations participate more equally, it will water down or diminish Jewish presence. And there's another school of thought, which is what I fall into, is that no, it only enhances Israel. And then that leads to my last point, which is really more of a question. I would love to ask them, how will a Gentile believing in Yeshua provoke a Jew who doesn't accept Messiah to jealousy? How are they going to do that? What's more likely to happen? Are they going to provoke the Jew to jealousy by having nothing to do with Judaism and telling them that, all you got to do is believe in Jesus and you can just, believe in Jesus and that's it? Or will it be seeing non-Jews loving Israel, loving Israel's people, wearing talits, reading from the Torah? It's those kinds of things that I believe, and I have seen it happen 2 times. I can attest to 2 specific instances where I've seen a non-believing Jew become jealous because they were seeing Gentiles participating in Judaism because of Yeshua. One was a friend was through my dad, who a member of his gym was Jewish, and my dad started telling him about the Messianic synagogue he was attending and how he was celebrating the Moedim, the God's appointed times, and celebrating the Shabbat. And next thing you know, this guy starts wearing his kippah all the time. And he started doing that after the conversation with my dad. And of course, not to go into the other story, I'm just saying that's an example. It was because my dad was telling a Jewish guy about all of the things he was learning from a Messianic synagogue. And this Jewish guy's hearing it, I guarantee you what this Jewish guy's thinking. He's like, I grew up with this stuff, and I'm not doing any of it, and here's a Gentile, talking about it like it's like his life. And it is my dad's
How does
life.
a Gentile incite a Jew to jealousy if they're not doing stuff a Jewish person would think was theirs? Mm-hmm. I mean, jealousy is when somebody shows interest and attention to something or someone that you believe belongs to you.
Right.
And so if a Gentile, a non-Jew, isn't doing something that a Jewish person would become jealous for, then there's no way they can incite a Jew to jealousy.
I used to love when Wendy from Bradam, she would talk about how she would talk to people about coming to Bradam and being in a synagogue, and they go, "Oh, were you Jewish?" She said, "No, but my Messiah was," and that was all the reason she needed, right. And I think the issue here, and it kind of goes back to something we talked about on a previous episode about how we have this tendency to expect other people to do the job we're supposed to do, right? And on that episode, I talked about it dealing with like legislation and legislative morality and what have you. But I feel like this is one of those conversations, because the question is always, well, what do you do about Jewish and Gentile identity within Messianic Judaism if you have full inclusion in Messianic Judaism? Or how do you make sure that the Jewish aspect of it doesn't get watered down by the Gentiles participating? And to kind of back up to a comment that Toby made, somebody saying, and this was in particular to a conversation about a conference, said, well, if we have all of these Gentiles and Gentile congregations coming in, then it's going to change the color of the conference, it's going to change everything about. And I'm sitting there the whole time going, but we already allow them. It's an open registration. Literally anybody can register for this conference and come. What the heck's the difference? Why are we? It makes no sense. But the reality is the question always comes down to, well, are we going to water down what Judaism is? Are we going to water it down and make it unrecognizably Jewish? Or how do we maintain identity, healthy Jewish and Gentile identity within Messianic Judaism? And I know it's a far thing to fathom. I know this is absolutely insane to suggest, but the suggestion I would pose is, how about we actually teach them? What if we started there? What if instead of precluding people from participating, we actually taught them, right? Hey, by the way, if you're not Jewish and you're participating in this, guess what? So did Ruth. Right? Ruth didn't go through some great massive conversion process. Ruth said, "Your people are my people, your God is my God. Where you go, I will go." And she went, right?
And she continued to be called Ruth the Moabitess.
Exactly.
Right. And
even down to Caleb and his brother Othniel, Caleb was one of the 12 spies sent in to spy out the promised land. Caleb was one of the only two to bring back a positive report. Caleb was the prince sent in as the head of Judah, or the representation of the tribe of Judah. But the Torah makes it a point over and over and over again to call Caleb a Kenizzite. And if you go back to Genesis, the Kenizzites were one of the original inhabitants of the promised land. And then what's that?
I was going to say, and I think it's one of his younger brothers that actually becomes one of the judges.
Yep, Othniel becomes the first judge of Israel. Not just one of, the first judge of Israel. And he's listed as Othniel, the Kenizzite, the brother of Caleb. So just a heads up, you've got people that were fully included in Israel and Jewish life and practice that were not called an Israelite. They did not convert to Judaism, so to speak.
Just out of curiosity, are you saying that Joshua didn't seem to have a problem including non-Jews in Israel, and a fear that Israel would cease to be Israel?
Yep. And not only
that.
And not only am I saying that definitively, but what I'm also suggesting is, in order for Israel, the second generation out of Egypt, to take the promised land, to step into the promises of God, it required a Jew and a Gentile working together as a precursor of the one new man, which, by the way, the call of the Brit Hadashah is for the one new man, Jew and Gentile alike, to lead Jews and Gentiles alike into the promises of God via Messiah.
And I think that's the picking which identity we want to have. And this is more for, because I'm not Jewish, so I can't.
How dare you?
Yeah.
No.
My identity is already picked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But especially the Jewish.
It's the 21st century, man. You can do whatever you want.
That's right. Yeah, pick whichever thing you want.
Identify as you want. No.
Yeah. But the Messianic world is, we do seem to be battling these two identities, and I would say, it's got to pick which one it wants. Does it want to continue to remain with the rabbinic identity of exile and diaspora and self-preservation, and we got to try our best to look only like us and nothing can change that or affect that? or are we going to embrace the message of our Messiah and go out into the world and take his teaching to the world and bring people in, and they will begin to look like our Messiah.
Right. We rob ourselves
rather than us looking like them.
We rob ourselves of the full benefit and blessing of what God's plan is because of fear that we'll that somehow, if we do what God tells us to do, we'll somehow mess up his plan.
Right.
So he won't be able to do. Like, we have the power somehow to mess up God's promise and keep him from fulfilling his covenant. And which is absolutely ridiculous. To think that any man has the ability, or all of us together have the ability to undo what God has promised he was going to do by doing what God asked us to do.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. You know, it comes down to, you know, you can be afraid of guns and therefore keep them away from your children, or you can teach your children how to respect and handle and treat guns. You can be afraid of cars and your children won't be able to drive, or you can teach them how to drive and how not to be afraid of what they're doing. We can have congregations made up of both Jews and non-Jews who are unified in faith and practice, or we can just divide into two camps in this dual ecclesiastic. What's it called? The bilateral ecclesiastic.
Ecclesiology.
Ecclesiology. Ecclesiology. Yeah. That says Jews are in this group and Gentiles are in that group, and never should the two. It's like the West Side Story. You know, we have the Americans in this side and the Puerto Ricans in that side, and they should never dance together, which is ridiculous, and it's contrary to God's word, which tells us over and over that we're supposed to be one body, one people, one faith, one immersion, one, not two separate, not two diverse and different, but one unified with distinctions.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I just want to make a very direct point here. Because I know the person that asked this question. I love him, good friends with him. And you know, this is Toby. So, Joe, you know me, and you know my wife, and you know that we're both Gentile, and you know that we're both dedicated to the Messianic movement, and we love God very much. So I'm just going to make a very direct statement about how I feel and how we all feel about, to answer your question. Not having full inclusion for non-Jews in a Messianic congregation is egregiously wrong. And as Rabbi Eric said, will God still bless? Yes, God still blesses. He's good, and he will still bless. But do I think it hinders the full benefit and blessing of the one new man? Absolutely. I think it's egregiously wrong to not allow full inclusion of non-Jews. I think it's egregiously wrong that if a non-Jewish person in some synagogues wants to have full inclusion, that they have to convert. Wrong. And I think Paul would be... If Paul were alive, I think he would shred anyone who had that idea. I think it would. He would. I think his heart would be turned over within.
I think if Paul saw some of the modern Messianic synagogues, he'd be writing a letter.
Yeah. And I think, he'd be writing a letter. That's the term I was looking for. And thirdly, let me explain to you a real thing that I've experienced. This isn't just to Joe. This is to anybody that's listening. Let me explain to you what me and my wife have experienced as Gentiles in the Messianic movement, because my wife and I are good at leading worship, because I'm adept at liturgy. I don't like to say I'm good at anything, but because I've been adept at Hebrew pronunciation and Hebrew and liturgy, and because my wife has excelled as a worship leader, and because we're so dedicated, we have had our Jewish brothers and sisters come up to us and say things such as, "You must be Jewish. You're too good at this. You must be Jewish. You love this too much. We're not Jewish." No, it's got to be back there somewhere. That is egregiously wrong. The fact that I'm 100%, to my knowledge, not Jewish, and I can participate and keep up with my Jewish brothers and sisters is a testimony to God and the glory of what he would say Israel would be to the world. So
absolutely,
it's absolutely egregiously wrong, and that is the attitude it creates. And you can, and my Jewish brothers and sisters can say all day long, "No, we know God doesn't love us more than you," but you are creating. If you're doing that, you're creating the appearance at best of a hierarchy. So that's that,
Yeah, and it's kind of flies in the face of what Yeshua says about the centurion that comes for healing. And remember, being God in flesh, we have no idea if he was speaking of just the contemporary Israelites or of Israel throughout all of history and time when he says, "Never have I seen such great a faith in Israel than in that Roman soldier, than that man there." So I like what David was saying about teaching, people, bringing people in to teach them. It reminds me, actually, I was at a funeral recently for some friends that was in a Catholic church, and when they were there during the mass, the priest at the beginning was saying, everyone is invited to come up for communion. However, if you are not in good standing or not in standing at all with the Catholic Church, you can still come up for a blessing. You can come up, just place your hands over your chest like this, and you can come up and be blessed. And I was like, that's really interesting that even though you may not be in and among, and I'm of course not in communion with the Bishop of Rome, you can still come up for them to pronounce blessing upon you, and they're willing to give that. And I was like, what if we embraced that idea with how we do things in the Messianic synagogue? We don't just let anyone carry the Torah scroll. We want them to be a part of our community. We want them to be in and among us and have shown themselves to be committed to the message of Messiah, to the lifestyle that's reflected in the Messianic synagogue. We don't just let anyone come up and read. One, they have to actually be capable of reading. Two, again, same deal. They have to be a part and have shown that they've learned and have committed their life and themselves to who we are and what our expression is. And that's the exact same thing the priest was saying at the Catholic Church. He was saying, if you are a part of this, you can do this thing. And so I think we should take the same stance with the Gentiles in our midst. We just don't invite people off the street to wear tallits and to wear kippot and but we should bring them in to teach them so they can participate and be a part of those things.
But also we should stop confusing the conversation by saying, that there are some within some of the organizations that will say, hey, this is Jewish stuff, this is our stuff, whatever, but then do things like bring pastors that speak as guest speakers at our conferences on stage and wrap a tallit and a kippah around them while the actually Jewish guys on stage don't have a kippah on or anything like that, and they're doing this whole shtick to you're an honorary Jew for the day. You want to talk about what's confusing things? That is right. This guy's not going to be in our congregations from here out. You're making awkward. Like I said, don't just take somebody off the street.
If you're gonna tell people that because they're Gentile they can't wear a kippah and a tallit in your synagogue, then don't invite a Gentile pastor to come speak at your conference and wrap a tallit around his shoulders and put a kippah on him. That is a mixed, inconsistent message.
Yeah, if you're not fully welcoming to Gentiles, stop using Gentiles for clout. Or money. Look, and here's the thing. Rabbi Toby and I have talked about this extensively. It's disgusting to me that within the Messianic Jewish movement, we are perfectly happy at looking at, and this is my perspective of how this looks. I'm not saying this is the attitude of the individual, though I think it's hard to sell that it's also not the attitude of the individuals, but that's a whole other story. That we will happily look at Gentiles as a cash cow. Right, we need Gentile money to run our congregations. We need Gentile money to sow into Israel with the Joseph Project, whatever else. We need all this money coming from the Gentile world. We need it. We're perfectly happy, as Rabbi Toby said, to have Gentiles lead worship for us because we don't have anybody else to do it, or to have Gentiles run our youth programs for us because we don't have anybody else to do it,
or because they bring clout. The conference.
We're perfectly happy to do all of that, but we draw the line at actually including these Gentiles that have a heart for it. Or worst case, and I see this with another Messianic podcast duo that's out there, that they will levy the accusation that an individual who is not Jewish and has a burden on their heart for Messianic Judaism and for living a Messianic Jewish life through and through, they will levy the accusation against them that they are quote-unquote one law. All because it's a Gentile that feels like wearing a Talit Katan is of importance and to them, and because they're not going around saying every Gentile has to do. They're saying, look, God has called me to this. This is the life that I live and practice. These are the people, and so I want to participate in this. Right. I feel called to, and so they'll levy this accusation. While at the same time, we ignore the fact that the sheer use of the nomenclature "one law" is absolutely idiotic. And we sound stupid using it because the Torah says there's only one law for the Jew and Gentile. That doesn't mean that everything in it is for everybody, but the Torah says there's only one law. Right. So to levy the accusation that somebody who wants to be fully included within the life and practice that God has called them to, that they're quote unquote one law, or that they're somehow theologically problematic, is idiotic. And on the other hand, to be happy to use them because they have gifts and talents that I don't have, but I don't want to actually give them any inclusion, or I don't want to actually give them any involvement. That also is hypocritical and idiotic. And we
beyond the one law claim, what frustrates me and angers me is when I hear people call them wannabes.
Yeah.
And you know, they're a wannabe Jew. They're a wannabe, and the reality is we need to let them be, not be Jewish, but let them practice biblical Judaism. Let them follow what the Bible teaches. Then they won't be a wannabe. They won't want to be something they're not. They'll actually be something they are within the unity of Jew and non-Jew as one new man.
And more accurate to that, and this goes back to my previous statement, how about rather than just letting them figure it out on their own, which is what gives us the Michael Roods and the Moshe Konikowskis and all of these whack jobs out there, what if we actually teach them? What if we actually disciple people to live in the way God has called them to live, and help, we sow in a healthy identity and so on and so forth. And look, here's the thing. I've said this, I want to say I've said it on this show before. I've definitely said it to probably people in positions that I shouldn't have and in ways that I shouldn't have, but nonetheless, I truly think that Messianic Judaism is partially culpable for the fact that the Hebrew Roots two-house whatever mess still exists. We're not responsible for the fact that it started. We're not responsible for the fact that it wholeheartedly, completely that it exists. But we are responsible for the fact and are culpable for the fact that it still exists, that it's still persistent in existence. Because the reason that so many Gentiles rush to Michael Roods and all these guys is because of the fact that we treat Gentiles as a movement the way that Rabbi Toby and Jonathan have described. We treat them as other, as less than, as not valuable, and so you've got somebody like Rabbi Toby or Rabbi Jonathan who goes, look, I'm not saying every Gentile believer in the world has to do this. I'm not even saying every Jewish person in the world has to do this, right? And
they don't.
Correct. Nobody has to, because salvation is not linked to whether or not we eat a ham sandwich or whether or not we take Shabbat off, right? Nobody has to. It's not like God's going to stomp us in the ground because we don't. Right. But the reality is if we're going to live in relationship with God, we should be obedient to God's word, right? And so when we have guys like Rabbi Jonathan and Rabbi Toby who are not Jewish, who have a whole, a complete and honest, legitimate heart for Messianic Judaism, an honest and legitimate divine calling to this life and practice, and have fully enveloped themselves in Messianic Jewish life and culture, right? They don't pretend to be Jewish. You've heard them on almost every episode we've ever done of this show say, I'm not Jewish. They don't pretend to be something they're not, but they also don't rob themselves of the blessing of being involved in something God's called them to, and neither should we. And the reality is people like Rabbi Jonathan and Rabbi Toby that feel called to Messianic Judaism and land in congregations that are not friendly to Gentiles, that are abrasive or separatist with Gentiles. Those people, just because they were turned away or just because they were treated poorly doesn't mean that the call in their heart changes, right? And so if the people that they should be plugged in with are not affirming the call of God on their heart, they're going to go find the people that will. And it happens that the people that will are the people that are already angry and are going to continue to sow division and disunity and anger and bitterness and strife into their hearts and their lives. And they're going to teach them, because we're not, they're going to teach them how to do it all the wrong way. And then when we talk about people being quote-unquote wannabes, as Rabbi Eric said, people will throw that term, they're like that because we weren't teaching them. Let's do our job. Let's start actually doing our job as rabbis, as Messianic Jewish leaders, as Messianic Jewish movement. Let's start doing our job through and through.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, again, it goes back to like even what the Torah actually says. Like, there's a lot of commandments when it comes to that are given to the nation of Israel that are, when it comes to like, well, is this applicable to those who may be Gentile? It's kind of vague. There is a lot that is vague, and I think that's done on purpose. I think that's why God moved in the direction of allowing Moses to establish the elder system, that you would have men of wisdom who would be the ones to say, yeah, you should do this. As someone who's not ethnically part of us, you should do this. You're here with us. There are some things in the Torah, though, that are very specific. If you're among us, you participate in this, and here's how you do that. Mm-hmm. And that's important to remember. And that's why the approach that we have, which is if you're here with us, if you are here committed to the message of Yeshua as taught through, as experienced and understood by the Messianic movement, here is how you do things. Here's how you do Passover, and you should do Passover. Here's how you keep kosher, and you should keep kosher. Again, we don't go out into the community, into the public, and like observe and try to catch people like, getting the bacon cheeseburger, or you're going to the concert on Friday night and buying concessions and snacks and popcorn and everything. We're not doing that. We simply expect, if you're going to be in and among us, that when you are with us, and hopefully at home and in private, you will be doing everything you can to live that way. Mm-hmm. Because that is what it is expected. And as your teachers teach you to be involved, you are to be involved as they teach you. But to say that, nothing's expected of them, that's just not true.
That's where discipleship, true discipleship, comes in, and mentoring and instructing and teaching.
Yeah. And I also want to say, Jewish or Gentile, doesn't matter to me. When you come into a Messianic Jewish congregation, no matter what God has put on your heart, you don't need to jump headfirst into everything day one.
No.
Right? When the first Shabbat that you show up in a Messianic synagogue, you don't need to show up the next Shabbat wearing a tallit katan and a kippah on your head and striving to keep kosher and whatever. Like, that's not to say that you won't get there eventually, but you need to let God work on your heart little by little. Because what a lot of times happens, and this is not a Jewish identity or Gentile identity issue, this is a human issue. A lot of times what happens is we will conflate the commandments with salvation, and then the commandments become legalistic rather than being an enhancement to our walk with the Lord. And so it's like going into a pool, right? You want to wade in slowly. You don't want to just jump right in head over heels, especially if you can't swim yet. You got to learn that part, right? So you go in and you start acclimating, you start becoming familiar with the people, with the liturgy, with what's happening. You start learning to worship, and then from there, your life progresses as the Lord leads.
Right. Otherwise, it becomes really stressful.
Yep.
Instead of being a blessing and a joy, and something it becomes part of who you are. It becomes this outward list of rules and regulations that you feel like a failure if you don't meet up to.
Yeah, I've had a number of conversations too over the years with fellow Jewish believers. Of all different kinds. Again, I've had some that feel that again, it's fine to be included. That they're not just fine. I'm just saying they agree with Gentile inclusion. Let's just say that. But I will say the ones that I've had conversations with that I know disagree with full Gentile inclusion. I have never met one that has been so ardent And I've never met one that has been so passionate enough to actually tell me that what I'm doing is wrong. I was talking to one Messianic Jewish believer and about keeping kosher, and their response was, well, you don't have to do that. And I'm like, well, I want to do that. And they were like, oh, okay. And I'm like, well, man, if it was that important to you, wouldn't you really give me all the reasons why I should be eating pork and all that? I mean, just tell me what I'm just missing out on. No, I didn't get that. And in fact, I've also had a conversation about the wearing of tzitzits with a fellow Jewish believer, and I'm pretty sure this person, again, falls in the camp of not allowing Gentiles to fully be included. And they said, well, how do you feel about Gentiles wearing tzitzits? And I'm wearing tzitzits at the time, and I said, well, I mean, I'm wearing tzitzits, so I believe it's okay. And they said, yeah, but do you think it should be encouraged? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess that depends. And he goes, well, I don't think it should be encouraged. I said, well, that's fine, but I don't think it should be prohibited.
Right.
And they were like, and their response was, oh, okay. And I'm like, dude, so nobody's ever told me to take my tzitzits off.
Right.
Nobody's ever told me to take my kibbah off. Not that that's right. That would be, not that they would do that. What I'm saying, if it's so detrimental that what I'm doing is just so detrimental, then come up to me and tell me what I'm doing is wrong.
Right.
And in every conversation I've had with people in that camp, their response is always, oh, okay. And maybe they're just like, well, but my thing is that if I'm really hurting the image of Messianic Jewish believers by doing these things, then for heaven's sakes, pull me to the side and explain it to me.
Right.
But like that one guy said,
he goes, something more than that's Jewish and you should. That's not an answer.
No, not that. Right, exactly. You give me the Bible and you give me some scriptures and you tell me why I'm wrong. Because when you tell me, again, that guy said, I don't think it should be encouraged. I said, that's fine. I don't think it should be prohibited, though.
Right.
I said, you don't want to encourage it, fine, but don't stop somebody.
Right.
And that's the thing, is like, at CMC, we both wear talikatans all the time. We both wear tzitzit all the time. But we don't instruct other people that they have to.
Yeah. Right.
But if they start asking questions, we will answer them and give explanation.
Yeah.
Here's why we do what we do and what have you.
Right.
But if somebody's going to do it, it's because the Lord moved on their heart to do it, not because we dictated that this is a life and practice you have to do.
Right. Yeah, because in Acts...
Same with keeping kosher and Shabbat and whatever else.
The first council ever among the leaders of the body Messiah happens in Acts 15 and 21, and it's again, it's like the soup. Like there is, you absolutely cannot do this. You absolutely cannot do this. And after that, it's kind of left to like it is purely in the hands of the local regional leaders as to what believers are going to do. And the only one of the only other things we have that's contemporary of the period that's written, the Didache, the focus is on how to learn how to pray, first of all, because pagans don't pray like Jews do. How to pray, how to fast, and how to make wise decisions, like very 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 Proverbs-esque, and so that's where you start. It says nothing about when or where they were trying to figure out wearing talits or arguing about it. It doesn't appear they were arguing about it. It was just you will grow organically by virtue of being here with us, and we're going to teach you how to pray. We're going to teach you how to fast, how to have a relationship with God and with each other, and whatever, and what comes out of that will come, and it will all be rooted ultimately out of the Torah. So it's kind of a silly argument when people want to try to, again, like you said, when people want to prohibit, because it's not prohibited from the beginning. It's not something that's laid down as a prohibition. So,
yeah. Well, with that said, we appreciate your joining with us today, and we pray that this has been a beneficial conversation for you. If you'd like to hear more on this issue, please submit those questions to us through our social media or through however it is you find this podcast. We'd love to dialogue more on this and other issues that are on our audience's heart. And we thank you for giving us the time, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.